Hey, want to hear a story? So, Critical Role Campaign 3 is nearly at the end. It has been a very long journey. I moved 2 times before the end of this campaign, and I gotta be honest, guys, I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it a lot. I definitely have my criticism of this latest campaign of the show, but as you've seen on Crispy's Tavern, I've talked a lot about how I like Critical Role Campaign 3. However, as I have watched Critical Role Campaign 3, I have noticed a bit of a change of discourse around the campaign. And yeah, I hate using that word, but it's the only word I can really use here. Because unlike Critical Role Campaign 1 and 2, where, yeah, Critical Role had drama and controversy, but Critical Role Campaign 3, it feels like never-ending barrages of scandals and drama. And a lot of it is a lot of smoke and basically no fire. These scandals almost always prove to be really disingenuous, blown out of proportion, or just downright silly. And today, as Critical Role Campaign 3 nears its finale, I wanted to look back down memory lane, take a trip, and look back on every time someone tried to push some snake oil scandal about Critical Role during the run of Campaign 3. It happened like a shocking amount of times. I can't possibly cover every single one, but I got the highlights for you. So without further ado, folks, what the hell happened? Okay, this one is not first up chronologically on the timeline, but I do want to address it because I'm not going to be going into detail, so I just want to get out of the way first. Brian W. Foster. If you're unaware, Brian W. Foster used to run the show Talks Machina. He's also the former partner of cast member Ashley Johnson. He and Ashley Johnson are currently in a civil dispute over domestic violence in their home. I am not going to be going into detail over this because this is an in-progress civil domestic case. And if you're unfamiliar with those, I'm going to lay it out for you real plain. These things are bitter, long, arduous, and basically never satisfying for everyone involved. They just suck. There's no epic trial or final confrontation. This isn't Ace Attorney. This is real life. And real life, it's not always the best thing. Look, I don't like covering things unless I can cover it confidently. And this situation, there's no confidence here for me. At least right now. So, yeah. I probably bummed you out that one, so let's move on to talking about something that everyone loves. Money! Woo! Look, Critical Role streams on Twitch. Everyone knows that. And people know that Critical Role is pretty popular on Twitch. Like, if you go to their stream, it's got a hell of a lot of viewers. But it wasn't until a massive leak at Twitch that people realized just how popular Critical Role really was. Over the course of 2 years, Critical Role became some of the top earners. In fact, the top earner on the entire platform based on subscriptions. They made almost $10 million, guys. That is a lot of cash. And apparently, some people had a problem with this. There were Twitter threads defending Critical Role from the haters who are mad that they're making too much money. I saw YouTube video essays covering the situation, trying to explain why they're making this money and what it's used for and blah, 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 blah. I'm gonna be honest, guys. A lot of smoke, not a lot of fire. I went and looked, guys. I looked for these mobs of people haranguing Critical Role over the fact that they made money. And I couldn't find them. Am I saying that I didn't find anyone? Hell no. I definitely found some whiners mad that Critical Role dared to have a Kickstarter campaign where they're making this much money. And let me just lay this out here, folks. Critical Role should be making this amount of money. The show is freaking good, and this money's coming from subscriptions. If you don't want Critical Role to be making this much money, stop watching the show and stop donating the money. That's where they're getting it from. This money means a lot less for Critical Role than it does for someone like Ludwig or Cutie Cinderella or XQC. These are streamers that are running smaller operations with less overhead. Critical Role have to pay their cast. They gotta pay their crew. They have a full studio to maintain in LA. That is a lot. I'm not trying to say Critical Role is poor. They are still a company. But are they Hasbro? Hell no. It still makes perfect sense that they would run a Kickstarter for their animated show. It still makes perfect sense that they would make merchandise and try to fund their projects. They still need money in order to do the things they want to do. That's how business works. I think this was an example of the Twitter trend piece. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, it's what I call an article that looks at a single tweet and says, oh my god, look at this big drama. And like I said, it's just a single tweet with a few hundred likes. It's really not that big of a deal. I think people were responding to a very tiny minority, an annoying minority, let me make it clear, but like still, a tiny minority of people mad that their favorite show is no longer their indie darling. But unfortunately, this money thing would come back into play during, in my opinion, Critical Role Campaign 3's first real controversy. Introgate. So, when Critical Role Campaign 3 began, I and many others were a little bummed out that there was no real intro to the show, especially since Campaign 2's intro, in my opinion, is probably one of the best intros I've seen for any show, period, outside the D&D realm or within it. I mean, dang, this animated intro, it hits hard. There's no other way to say it. So I had high expectations for Critical Role Campaign 3's intro. The cast built up the hype. They waited, and a few weeks into it, they premiered their new intro, and it was not what I nor were many people expecting. It was live action and featured a more explorer, adventurer aesthetic, with the cast delving through a jungle and ancient ruins, cutting back to the tabletop with colors flying around in slow-mo, with a brand new theme song, which I was not expecting at all. It was very surprising for me. But the surprise I felt when watching the intro is nothing. Nothing compared to the surprise I felt when I went and saw that on Twitter, people were claiming that the new Critical Role Campaign 3 intro glorifies colonialism and erases Swana cultures. What? Okay, time to walk you guys through this one. It's a wild ride. So, Critical Role Campaign 3's intro obviously has this explorer adventure aesthetic lifted from games and movies like Indiana Jones, Uncharted, and the claim is that these franchises, this pop culture stuff, this is connected intrinsically to colonialism, to the erasure of Swana cultures, to the theft of historical artifacts, stuff like that. And look, am I trying to say that this has no merits at all? No. But as a guy who literally just spent an entire episode calling out some really racist colonialist BS in a book, literally just the last episode of this show, I gotta say, guys, looking at this controversy years later, what the hell were y'all doing? This is not like one of those Twitter trend pieces I mentioned earlier, okay, guys? Like, this was a pretty popular movement of people. These tweets were getting thousands of likes. And look, do I think these people were in the vast majority destroying and canceling Critical Role? No, I don't think that was the case. However, I do think it's important to acknowledge that this was definitely something. This is the first time that Critical Role Campaign 3 got into some major heat. It wasn't from the majority, but it was still from a sizable group of people. There was a Kotaku article written about it that I think was largely very silly and took a lot of information way out of context. Like, one of the arguments that was made on Twitter and the article was that the Critical Role cast is all white, and that shows a really problematic angle because they're exploring these Swana cultures in their campaign and in their intro. And guys, that is, like I said, so out of context it's ridiculous. The Critical Role cast were not casted. There was no casting director choosing an all-white cast, choosing an all-white crew, choosing all-white extras, etc., etc., etc. No, this was just a group of friends who happened to stumble into this. And now that they have a major presence, they have an animated show, they have guests, they have definitely shown themselves to value diversity. And besides, what's this article's solution to the diversity issue in Critical Role? Do they want to break up the cast? Like, guys, I am a person who celebrates diversity a lot in the stuff that I consume and enjoy. But breaking up the Critical Role cast, a cast with near perfect chemistry, synergy that has built up a massive fandom over almost a decade, breaking up that cast would be a completely idiotic move. What are are you talking about? Beyond that, they acknowledge that the Critical Role intro is probably more referencing stuff like Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones, less the colonialist roots of the fashion, but they completely ignore that and hyper-focus on the fact that this erases the problems with colonialism, glorifies people that did terrible things to the countries they colonized, and I just gotta sit here and think, dude, I think it's really important to keep in mind the context of what you are talking about, especially in the modern cultural conscience. I mean, look at the movies and television shows that we have all around us. Not just with explorer aesthetics, but with any sort of fantasy aesthetic. I mean, if you look at any piece of historical or fantasy fashion, you can probably trace a lot of it back to some pretty crappy, terrible things. I mean, look at How to Train Your Dragon. I love How to Train Your Dragon, and the main characters of How to Train Your Dragon are the people of Berk. Vikings. Do you know what Vikings did? Vikings did some really bad stuff in our real life history. That's just a fact. Does that mean that How to Train Your Dragon is advocating and celebrating the terrible things that Vikings did to the people that they raided and victimized? No, dude, because the cultural conscience shifts over time. The meaning of these outfits and these fashions and the fantasy changes. I think understanding the historical context and truths, the good and the bad, which, like, let's be honest, guys, there's a lot of bad beyond a lot of this stuff. Look, I think understanding those truths when we're engaging in fantasy, I think that that's important. Do I need a disclaimer before every single playthrough of Ghost of Tsushima because samurai were feudalists who killed a lot of peasants? No, I think that that's kind of silly expectation. Look, I think it's important to learn these things, but I think it's also important to understand the cultural conscience and to understand how context is important and how that culture and context shifts over time. All that stuff in all these discussions is almost gleefully completely ignored. It's even better when you understand that if they want to make a video or an article about Critical Role's new intro being bad, they could have. The intro's not very good. I don't think this explorer aesthetic really matched what D&D or what tabletop role-playing games in general are. I really don't think it matched the vibe that Critical Role Campaign 3 was going for. The tabletop sections, the slow-mo was cool, but I thought it was really awkward and honestly weird to watch, especially for a first-timer, and I don't think they used the song to its fullest potential. I think that this intro is bad and a massive downgrade in comparison to both Campaign 2's intros, the animated one and the live action one where they went with a more 80s aesthetic, which in my opinion, much more match with the vibe of tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons. This intro was not good. You could have made an article about that, but the people who pushed this instead focus on colonialism and the claim that Critical Role is actually erasing Swana cultures by doing this. And it only got worse when Brian Foster joined the discussion, which, oh my god. I can't access those tweets for some strange, unknown. Critical Role would end up changing their intro to one that I think is even worse with this faux animated nonsense that didn't even sync to the song properly. It was not good. But then they changed that intro to, in my opinion, an intro that lives up to the Campaign 2 animated glory days. Like, seriously, the new Campaign 3 intro hits hard. I love it. Like, I didn't care for It's Thursday Night when the intro first came out, but now I think the song is just as good as Your Turn to Roll. This stuff, this is good. So, if somehow Introgate ended up landing us back here with a great, polished, incredible animated intro, I mean, it was still stupid, but at least it got us this. Alright, moving on. During the run of Critical Role Campaign 3, Critical Role premiered a brand new spin-off in the form of Kandala Obscura, a show that was meant to promote their brand new game by the same name, a minimalist horror game based in the Powered by the Apocalypse system. And while I thought it was, it was alright as a game, a lot of the reception to Candela Obscura's release acted like this thing was the freaking Antichrist. I'm not trying to say there were no sane reviews of Candela Obscura. Absolutely. And I think a lot of the criticism of Candela Obscura is warranted. This book is very, very bare bones in terms of rules. In my opinion, that is part of the point of why it was made. I mean, this is powered by the Apocalypse system. Those systems generally go more minimalist on the rules. It is also meant for a shorter campaign. So people acting like it's going to sustain a 100-session long story, that's not what it was made for. I don't know why people were acting like it was supposed to be that. And I do think some of the horror sections and the safety tool sections were, in my opinion, poorly conveyed to the reader. But again, people were talking about this book like it is here to unravel the thread of RPG. Is this thing even a game? I think a lot of the discussion around this book also just frustrated me because Candela Obscura is fundamentally a very different game from Dungeons & Dragons, and a lot of people framed it like it was supposed to be a D&D type experience. Like it was supposed to have a lot of rules, and its lack of rules just means it's bad. It was supposed to be an adventure game that lasts a whole campaign, and because it's made for short campaigns, it's bad. Like, these things are just not what the game was made for. You're playing Candy Crush, but you're expecting Call of Duty. It's just not the same experience, man. I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point. At the very least, I can personally recommend Candela if you want a one-shot out there. Get the book if it's on sale. Watch the show if you have the time. It's some pretty good stuff. It was definitely not worth all the drama. Ooh, guys, now we're moving into the really silly stuff. This is a talking point that exists throughout the run of Critical Role. It is not necessarily tied to the aftermath of Candela's release or anything like that, but I just want to put it here because I don't really know where to put it. Critical Role Campaign 3 is killing the brand.
Critical Role Campaign 3 isn't connecting with viewers, but does that really matter? Campaign 3 is down in viewership for the second year in a row across Twitch and YouTube.
Oh boy. So, in case you guys forgot, at the beginning of the video, we talked about Critical Role Campaign 2's massive success. Critical Role being at the top of Twitch. Critical Role making $10 million off subscriptions. And those things were from a leak, so obviously we don't have the updated information. But it is very plain to see that Campaign 2, during the pandemic, it was an insane success story for Critical Role. And Campaign 3, in terms of the raw numbers, has not completely lived up to Campaign 2. And people reacted to that. I mean, I swear, there's a whole genre of D&D drama video, which is just YouTubers joylessly masturbating to Critical Role's Social Blade page, talking about Critical Role's steep decline, how Campaign 3 is the nail in the coffin for the brand, how the drama just got worse, and blah, 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 blah. And guys, it is so disingenuous, all this conversation. For the record, Critical Role, objectively speaking, is getting less views than it did during Campaign 2. Campaign 2 was a massive boon for them. They grew an absurd amount during the pandemic, as did many brands who could benefit from a world at home. But when that ended, Critical Role's numbers stabilized back down to normal levels, because that's how business works. On YouTube, you don't stay at your peak forever. Right now, as of filming this in January, I am at my peak viewership. I have never gotten more views than I've gotten in January of 2025. Am I gonna stay here forever? No, dude, that's not realistic. That is a completely absurd expectation. Peaks, valleys, they happen. That Critical Role is not dying because they're not at their peak. Nobody stays at their peak. The YouTubers who were talking about this, I'm gonna come out and say, they know that. They know that Critical Role doesn't need to stay at their peak to survive. They know the brand isn't dying. They probably know that because none of them were staying at their peaks either, because that's normal. Does that mean their channels are dead for all time? Hell no. Look, is Critical Role a forever brand that's completely immortal and immune to death? No, anybody can be killed. But does that mean that Critical Role is dying right now? Does that mean Critical Role is out the door just because their numbers are a little down? No, okay? Numbers go down, numbers go up. That's the biz. Just keep that in mind the next time someone talks about the inevitable end of Critical Role. they're probably not telling the complete truth. Oh, this one. I made a whole video about this one. Fresh cut grass. If you guys are unaware, fresh cut grass is the cleric of the Critical Role Campaign 3 party Bell's Hells. And during the final battle against Odahan Thule, a foe that in previous battles had slain many party members of Bell's Hells, FCG sacrificed himself to do away with the evil villain. And a lot of people were really mad about it. Oh my god. Like, this is kind of an example of the Twitter article where, yeah, this was not the vast majority of people. I think most people who know anything about D&D understood why Fresh Cut Grass died. It was a really intense battle. Matt had placed one foe, Odahan Thule, the Echo Knight, along with her echoes, against all 7 members of Bell's Hells. And he needed to make Odahan really powerful in order for that fight to be even remotely challenging. But, while, like I said, most people understood why that's the case, some people had a problem with that. They had a problem with Odahan Thule having abilities that the party doesn't have access to. They had a problem with Odahan Thule's abilities working differently from the written Echo Knight abilities in any of the Exandrian books. And guys, that's normal. And there were even people on the subreddit talking about how Matt Mercer must have made mistakes when running the combat, making Odahan far more powerful than she was supposed to be. But, like, y'all, he has to do that. Monsters and player characters, they're scaled differently. She needs to be insane in order for that combat to work at, like, a fundamental level. And FCG's sacrifice was a really, really well done moment in response to a crazy difficult combat. Of course, the context of all of this really changes when you realize that Sam Riegel was diagnosed with cancer during the filming of Critical Role Campaign 3. A big reason why he was leaving, the primary reason why he was leaving, was because he had to go into chemotherapy in order to deal with that. It wasn't just because Robot Go Boom. And I don't want to talk about this too much, but obviously that really changes the context of the whole situation. But even then, I still see people, even now, talking on Reddit about how Matt Mercer made his combat too hard, how he forced Sam into a blah, 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 blah. It really frustrates me. The way people respond to difficult combats in D&D sometimes just blows me away. Again, made a whole video about this. If you are not in the Critical Role fandom, I do want to say right now, not to worry. Sam Riegel came out of his chemotherapy strong and healthy and well. He still has a road to recovery ahead of him because cancer frickin' sucks, but he's fighting through it, and as a dude who unfortunately has lost people to cancer, I gotta say, I'm hella happy for him. Fight the good fight, man. Fuck cancer. Ugh, I wish I could end off there, man. That's a hell yes message, but I got more stupid stuff to talk about, so freaking, here it goes. Next one. This could apply to so much stuff. But I'm talking about one situation in particular because this was so egregious to me, but Critical Role is canceled, or at least their minis are canceled. Some of their minis are canceled. So Critical Role works with a company called WizKids. They make tabletop miniatures. It's not rocket science. But anyway, the point is a few Critical Role miniatures for their spin-off show Calamity, as well as some of their big bad monsters, they got canceled. The orders were refunded. And people made a stink about this. Like, I don't really know what they were making a stink about. There was clearly an issue with production. Some people claimed from within the company that there was an issue with just not enough pre-orders. There wasn't a high enough volume for them to justify production, so they ended up canceling and refunding the orders. This was a big nothing burger story. It would be a big story if Critical Role, like, kept the money and scammed their viewers, but at the end of the day, not every project works out. Critical Role is absolutely still putting out minis. It is possible that there is some bad blood and beef between Critical Role and WizKids, the company that was producing these things, but until we know, it's really stupid to speculate about it because we just don't know. There is no known information. Period. End of story. Story's done. I think the real story here is that people really love putting Critical Role and canceled within the same sentence and not giving an utter shit about the context or about the integrity of the story either. Look, there's a story here. Critical Role canceled their minis, people were refunded. But that story can literally be done in a tweet. The amount of BS. Articles and videos written about this, in my opinion, really shows the lack of integrity when it comes to publishing about any news within the tabletop role-playing game industry. This is utter, hyperbolic, clickbait nonsense. And look, I love clickbait as much as the next guy, but I am not misleading or lying to my audience. And I know someone's gonna blame the YouTube algorithm game, but frankly, there are countless channels out there who are far more successful than the channels that clickbaited this nonsense. Those channels do not need to lie to their audience. You don't need to lie to your audience either. No problem with reporting on current events surrounding Critical Role. I just wish people would be just a tad more truthful about it when it comes to getting the videos and articles made. Alright, ending off this whole bonanza with the big thing. Critical Role Campaign 3 revolves around Predathos, the God Eater, and the creature's imminent release from the moon! Bell's Hells have been embroiled in a war of the divine. A second calamity is upon Exandria. It's a lot of really big picture stuff. And a lot of people are really frustrated by the plot line surrounding the gods. Bell's Hells themselves are very wishy-washy about their opinion on the whole thing. An indifferent and indecisive opinion that has frustrated a lot of viewers who are not used to a party being this ridiculously indecisive to almost a villainous degree. Like, some people are calling Bell's Hells an evil party. That's how much they're getting tired of this god plot. And am I going to talk about this in this video as just another dumb Critical Role controversy with a lot of smoke and not a lot of fire? I actually kind of understand this one. I have a whole video planned very soon, don't worry, it's the sequel to this one, where we talk about Critical Role Campaign 3's God plot. Even as a guy who really liked Critical Role Campaign 3, who enjoyed this show through its runtime, who has defended it on multiple occasions, I gotta say, this particular plot line, it's not doing it for me, and it's reminding me of some of the most disappointing stories I've ever experienced. But of course, Critical Role Campaign 3 is not quite done yet. I'm going to be waiting until the show is done and I process everything before I make that video. So for now, I'm leaving you here. I hope you guys enjoyed this trip down memory lane, the many controversies and scandals of Critical Role Campaign 3. Most of them largely very silly. In any case, if you guys enjoyed, you might enjoy our last episode of RPG Horror Stories. We talked about a DM who tried to trick a girl into joining her threesome. Very interesting. Linked up in the cards. But before you go, please do leave a like on this one and subscribe to Crispy's Tavern so you don't miss any of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own suggestions or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. It ain't a scandal. So let me know at the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time. Farewell.